Welcome back to Wildlife Producing with Kong. Hello humans. Now, if you haven't heard, we put out a new song called Baseline High. Here it is. Yeah, you might have already seen the video of Bao reacting to it.
Oh, not found, bro.
Actually, I don't know what he meant, but he also talked about gain staging.
You must gain stage, huh?
Well, gain staging is important in a sense, it's not so much. If you don't know what gain staging means that you have an eye on your levels and that you don't go into reds and make sure all the levels are in a correct space. Well, over the time mixing songs, I ended up having levels that are actually all are pretty equal. Like the loudest elements always tend to be around -12. And if we go to the bass drum here, so the bass drum is a little bit louder, but it's not the final bass drum. I have to admit this is like an earlier version. But yeah, this is basically because we then stamped out the track after this version here, and then we sent it to SK and he did his magic, and then we brought it back in stems, and that's the other project with the stems. But I wanted to look at first on which kind of elements go together to create like the bass oomph and how they are built and what they are doing, to explain to you how to get like this crazy sound wall while still being clean, I guess. I mean, you know, you have like a couple of frequency ranges, right? You have bass, you have mids, and you have highs. Well, that's not news, but if you have your basic idea, you need to make sure that those elements kind of take those spaces in a useful and senseful way. So one of the most important elements, of course, is the vocal. So let's listen to this vocal, to all the vocal things that are going on here. Baseline. I don't hear anything because, let me put the cans on. Okay, you notice that the initial baseline high has more highs to it because there's more space, there's nothing else going on. You see a little spectrum here. And then here in this version, also these are formatted down. That means there's already not as much highs in there. So you see they are rolling off. And they are pretty dull actually. And if we take a look at the spectrogram, they range from around 300 to about 8K. So whatever happens at the same time will not interfere with the vocals as long as it's lower in frequency, lower in volume, or above this, right? So this is like already something that's pretty easy to understand. So if we now put a sub there, we can make both elements audible without them being messy, right? Let's take a look at the bass line. So we have the main bass line here. This is already a printed stem here from this, maybe because of CPU stuff, or I don't know. But what we have in here is, oh wait, and And there's something else going on. Ah yeah, this alarmy thing here, but it's a little bit vocally, so it's there to be in the background and make some alarm, like a little bit of there's something going on. That's also sometimes good to have in a lot of dubstep songs, have those elements. Sometimes it's like applause of a big crowd that is sidechained and everything. So that this is one of those elements. But yeah, let's look into the bass line. So we have this one element. By the way, what's in here? Pro L. All right. And we have this. And together, little bit of OTT, 17%. And now this is crazy. Also, this is a little bit off. Obviously. Not sure what happened there. So you see the way this curve is right now, it's not so important. Much more important is the way the spectrum looks. It's pretty even, and then it's rolling off in the highs. My tilt of the spectrum is 3 dB per octave, which corresponds with pink noise, and I would recommend it to you because it's the easiest way to have like a full sound, and the full sound will always be linear in your spectrum. And then we put both things into clipping to make a mess out of it. These are the only two layers. The second layer here, the higher one, is also very narrow. There's a chorus on it, immature, so it's wide, and it has a super saw character in the means of that has some unison and some comp filtering to make it like smoosh, swoosh, swooshy, phasey and stuff. And that's already like the main sound. Of course I have to mute one of those tracks. And so you have the vocals and this bass line. And they go with each other. And they still leave some space in the top end here. You can break this down to 2 tracks, right? Maybe 3 if you count the layer. 3 tracks. So let's look in the final project. We have this thingy here as a stem. I was very precise with the volume of the stem. And by the way, it got limited on the bus up to maybe 4 dB or something. Okay, so there's a little bit more happening. We have here, let's find it. Ah, it's already in here. We have a texture. Listen to the texture solo. So the texture is putting noise on top of the sound. And the noise is still pretty broad. You see it's going down almost to the bass here. So it's almost over the full spectrum. And if we look in the EQ, yeah, there's nothing going on. It's actually just noise, no EQ after it. And yeah. Okay, what else do we have? We have some... Okay, all we have in here are actually things that get automated along the way and that are not contributing to the sound anymore. So we only have noise, we have a bass sound, and we have this layer which is two octaves up and 7 semitones, I think. And then we have the vocal as a sort of lead layer over the bass sound. And if you put this together, it sounds massive. Now, of course, if you want it to sound massive, you also have to give those elements the space to be massive, which means you cannot have too much things going on at the same time while the sound is playing. Every element you add which is playing at the same time in the same frequency spectrum will definitely take away from your main sound. Every of your elements should have like a certain frequency spectrum or a certain time when they happen, and then at the same time they shouldn't interfere. It depends on the song you're making, it depends on the genre you're making, and but basically in EDM that's what is happening. That's why we are also sidechaining so hard all the stuff that is going on here. Like this is the sidechain, and you see everything gets stuck down on this bus here when it's triggered. So there's absolutely nothing interfering with the drums that are playing when the sidechain is triggered. So I think it's a sidechain for the snare, because the other sidechain for the kick is already in there and we changed the snare later on. But it's the same, it's basically the same thing. So let's listen to the drum solo to see what's going on here. You see, only in those bits where there's nothing big happening, like here, there's enough space to have more crazy elements. Here, like percussion stuff. Also, in the top end, we have a little bit of space left, as you've seen. Of course, there's the noise going on, but the noise is not as loud as hi-hat would be or something. So we can see this in the spectrum here. Let's have a look. So you see the snare here, the top of the snare is louder than the top of the bass line. You also see here what comes the whoomp, and there's nothing else happening while this whoomp is coming, so you give the whoomp room to be whoompy. Whoompy Goldberg. Am I getting in trouble now? And I think this track especially showcases how modern mixing works. And it makes it very easy to understand. There's not much happening, and at the same time it sounds very powerful and very full. These are like the ground rules you have to follow if you want a clean mix. First of all, give the elements their own space in the frequency spectrum. And if they share some space, make sure they have a different accent maybe. So like maybe the vocal sample has a little peak, and you see that in the mixing stage I took down more of the lower mids because I felt it's interfering with the bass line. Let's reverse that. You hear now that it's like taking the attention away from the main sound. And now your focus while listening changes to the bass sound that is now coming in. Yeah, even those elements that interfere with each other, of course, and you have to make sure that you listen, like the focus of the listener is on what he should listen to. And that's, of course, I mean, if I explain it like that, it sounds like, oh, you have to be very thoughtful. What should the listener listen to? It's also a very emotional decision you're making while you're working on the song. Like, I can't hear the bass line really. I want the bass line to be louder. And instead of making the bass line louder and kind of ruining maybe everything that you have established with your frequency spectrum, see what other parts are masking the element and take them down a bit in this part of the frequency spectrum, which is here like 500 hertz or something. If something's in the same frequency range, make sure the levels are in a way that the focus is on the main element. And then there's the other side of it, and that's the time side. You have the bass drum, and there's a lot of bass, and the bass line has also a lot of bass. You just sidechain the bass line so heavy that it's not sharing any time with the bass drum anymore, and they're not interfering. They sound clean. Does this make mixing easier for you? Does this actually help? It's also important to listen in mono. In mono, you should definitely check your levels and see if the main element is actually important in mono. And then maybe listen to the side signal as well. And see if the levels there are also in a way that's contributing to the song. That's a good thing. You can always like listen to only parts of your song and see if the song still works in those little parts. Like, does it work in the low end? Is it boring? Does it need movement? Does it need dynamic and volume to be more interesting? And the same, of course, is for everything else. You can also listen only to the top end of your song and feel, are the hi-hats too much playing all the time? Are the hi-hats actually masking the top of my snare, and is it good or is it bad? Because sometimes maybe your snare sounds boring and you have a hi-hat on top of it, and suddenly it's not so important anymore because you don't hear the boring part. So you can also use it for your for you. All right. I think we all learned something here today. Mixing is easy. Everyone can do it. It's really no magic. All you need is a little bit of gut feeling, and don't think too much. Feel what you're doing. Of course, you need a couple of different approaches to a problem, but lowering volume in a part of the spectrum or over the whole instrument with your fader is 90% of the time the thing you want to do to make it work. And maybe you can listen to our song now, and maybe you can pinpoint the elements of it, and then you will be happy because you learned, and we are all wiser. Now, any cool last words from me? Is there anything I can add? I'm not sure. I think I'm gonna let the song play for a little while. And see you next time. Ah, by the way, Johannes already recorded a video and he put the whole Ableton MP3 sample thingy in the end, and it's coming next week. And we just want to cover baseline high because it was just released already. Yeah. We're still investigating the mystery of MP3 decoding in Ableton and FL Studio. So stick around, subscribe, hit the bell. We see us next week. Bye bye.